Hello and welcome to BBC World News. There have been clashes in the streets outside Tunisia's parliament following the president's overnight decision to suspend the legislature. Troops have surrounded the government's headquarters in Tunis, preventing staff from entering. Supporters of the president, Kais Saied, took to the streets to celebrate the move, which was sparked by anger over the government's handling of a recent spike in COVID cases. But supporters of the country's largest political party have been staging a sit-in in front of Parliament. They've described the president's actions as a coup. Well, our North Africa correspondent Rana Jawad is in the capital, Tunis. She gave me the very latest on the situation there.
Generally speaking, everything is open and functioning as normal, with the exception of two key institutions which were frozen or dissolved overnight by the president, that being the Parliament building and the government building, the Prime Minister's headquarters at the Kasbah in central Tunis. The army moved in to both at different times. At the Parliament overnight, when MPs, including the Speaker of the Parliament, tried to access the building to hold an emergency session. And the government building is also blocked off by the army, which prevented staff from entering as well.
And there's a feeling, just looking at the pictures now, that there is popular support behind the president, despite the fact that many are saying what he's done is unconstitutional.
Yes, in terms of the street, your average Tunisian who has repeatedly come out over the last several years, really, we're not just talking about, the protests that took place yesterday or the movement of protests back in January and February. There are bouts of protest here literally every few months, if the circumstances allow it, particularly since COVID came into play. So these are the people who came out in protest as well yesterday and called for the dissolution of Parliament, which was then followed by the president's decree, as it were, when he came out and froze Parliament and dissolved the government under Article 80 of the Constitution, which his opponents have described as an unconstitutional move and a coup against the Constitution.
Well, President Kais Saied has said that he would assume executive authority and, in a statement announcing the move, warned against any violent response. He claimed many people were deceived by what he called hypocrisy, treachery and the robbery of their rights. But he gave a warning to people thinking of resorting to weapons. If anyone used bullets, he said the armed forces would respond with bullets. Well, I'm joined now by Yusra Ghanouchi, international spokeswoman for the Ennahda party and daughter of Rashid Ghanouchi. Let's talk to you, Yusra. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today on BBC World News. Let me first of all gauge your reaction to what has been happening over the past 24 hours.
What we're seeing in Tunisia is very dangerous. It is a violation of the Constitution. It is a serious threat to Tunisia's democracy and all the gains that have been made over the last 10 years. Tunisia is facing challenges and difficulties, economic difficulties, political crisis, the pandemic. However, none of this justifies such an attempt to suspend Tunisia's democracy and take us back to dictatorship.
The president would argue, though, and many of the people would argue, because it seems that there is popular support behind him, that you've had 10 years now to sort out the issues and problems in Tunisia. It's been a difficult 10 years. It's been very hard for people, 40% unemployment, 15 to 24-year-olds, a brain drain of people leaving the country. Many people would argue that it's time for some sort of action because the country needs change. Things haven't gone well, and you've been in charge for 10 years.
Ennahda has not been in charge for 10 years. It has been the first party for most of those 10 years, but even currently, Ennahda does not have ministers in the government. However, we do accept that Tunisians have high expectations that have not been fulfilled. However, these problems have been inherited from decades of dictatorship and have been exacerbated by, obviously, a difficult transition from dictatorship to democracy, as well as a challenging regional situation and now the pandemic. None of this will be solved by a coup. None of this will be solved by turning our backs on democracy and returning to the very same one-man authoritarian rule that Tunisians rose against 10 years ago.
What are your plans next?
We reject this violation of the constitution and grave threat to Tunisian democracy, as do many political parties in Tunisia and civil society organizations. We are working with everyone to oppose this, to restore democracy, and then to work with everyone through dialogue to convince politicians to focus on Tunisians' real problems and real needs, which can only be done by respecting the constitution and respecting democracy.
But will you be calling for people to come onto the streets to protest against what's happened or not?
We have called for calm and vigilance, and also the assembly right now is already in a state of permanent session, as the constitution requires, including the article number 80 that the president has mentioned. It does not provide for suspending the assembly nor dismissing the government. It requires the president to consult with the Speaker of Parliament and the Prime Minister, and to keep Parliament as in place and functioning. The Speaker of Parliament and MPs are in the Assembly, and there are thousands of supporters in front of the Assembly demanding an end to this grave threat to Tunisia's democracy, stability and security.
What do you think is going to happen next in Tunisia? How worried are you about the status quo?
It is a very dangerous situation. The situation was already difficult politically, economically, socially, and health-wise, and we must return to focusing on those problems. We call on the president to repeal these unconstitutional, illegal announcements and this attempt to monopolize all power in the country, and we call for a restoration of democracy. We call on all Tunisians to defend their democracy, and we call on all supporters of democracy and all our international partners to stand with us and to condemn this coup.
Yusra, thank you very much indeed. Yusra Ghanouchi there.
My pleasure.